If you were here at the 5:30 Christmas Eve service this evening, you would have heard the same solo which Allie Mulmar sang so marvelously for us tonight now. You would have heard it at 5:30 sung by Elizabeth Ingram, who also did a marvelous job. But you would have seen something a little bit different. While Elizabeth was singing "O Holy Night" and I was sitting there watching her from the chair on the side, I also noticed here in the very front pew, Elizabeth's husband, Justin, holding their little son, James Frederick, who was just a little more than a year old, but really coming into himself and observing and knowing what's going on in the world around him. I'm worried, though, about the trauma his parents may be inflicting him by having him sit here in the first pew Sunday after Sunday, because you remember it was just a few weeks ago when I did my own rendition of Santa Claus is Coming to Town in a scary voice that made poor little James cry right in the middle of it. But I was watching him tonight when all of a sudden he realized that that was his mom singing there, "O Holy Night." And there was nothing that he wanted to look at more than his mom singing. And he reached out his arms toward her as she sang, and I thought to myself, wow, that's got to be hard to sing that solo while your baby's there in the front pew reaching out for you. The funny thing was, it reminded me, though, of another Christmas Eve service about 21 years ago. Another early service that we had just started to have, and having just reinstated it, we didn't have as many musically talented people as we do here this evening, and our organist at that time, David Patton, had coaxed and manipulated me into singing a solo for that service, if you can imagine that. And the solo he actually had me sing was just the carol, which the choir sang tonight, "Still, Still, Still," because we had just made the momentous decision as a congregation to go from the red hymnal to the blue hymnals, and "Still, Still, Still" wasn't in the red hymnal, but it was in the blue, so we could sing it as kind of something new. David talked me into doing that, but at that time, I stood behind the wooden rail, which used to be there and separate the clean from the unclean. And on that side, if you remember, on that side, as I stood behind the rail on that evening, trying to sing "Still, Still, Still," the lovely Austrian carol, I had a little 2-year-old boy at my feet who I was trying to watch at the same time. And as I sang, he decided it would be a good idea to pull out the plug that was right there next to the choir and see what would happen if he could stick his fingers into the socket at the same time. So while I sang, with one foot, I tried to keep him out of the electrical socket. Now, I use that as the excuse as to why it wasn't exactly a riveting solo that evening, but there may have been other things involved in it as well. And that just got me to thinking about all of the dynamics that are going on at these Christmas Eve services across the years in such a way that it almost seems like space and time themselves sort of get set aside, and we begin to experience and be open to realities, and in particular, the realities of who we are as human beings and as families and friends, and the reality of God's presence with us. At the earlier service, as is probably the case tonight, there were pews filled with family members, and one pew toward the back was filled with the Dothrow family, and as I was visiting with them, they announced to me, "This is the pew that Alberta always sat in." And so we sit in it year after year after year. And I said, "And I bet she's sitting in it here tonight with you this very Christmas Eve." And they said, "You bet she is." And it was a delight for them to think about that, being here and worshiping in the presence of a loved one who is in the church triumphant. At the same time, I walked a few pews back and greeted a young couple with 2 small children who got married here at Park Lake about 10 years ago, and come back Christmas Eve after Christmas Eve to see if I can still remember the children's names, which I can't. But you see, this year at Thanksgiving time, they had also called to tell me that her father had passed away. And so that they could barely sit in those pews there with his widow and the daughter and son-in-law and grandchildren without crying at just about every word that was spoken during the service. How is it that these things are going on this particular night as the people of faith, as the community gathers here at this nativity? Even at this 11 o'clock service, I look out and see families coming together and people being, David Van Brackle showing up year after year like the crocus blooming in the desert that Isaiah prophesies about, a young man from the youth group coming to visit and say hello to his friends. Others of you, a neighborhood friend coming and sharing with me as he and his wife are here together this evening, that they were married here 40 years ago and went to kindergarten here years before that. What is it about this evening and this place and this time of worship that opens us up to the nature of God's presence with us and the world as God must have created it and intended it to be? What do we come to see? What do we come to feel? What do we come to touch? In some fashion, I think we all come for the same reason, more or less, to be here so that in some way we might catch a glimpse of the manger and see there the one whose birth we stand at the edge of and have come to celebrate. But what do we expect to see? What really shall we behold? If any of you have watched the TV show Crown on Netflix, you will have seen an episode where Winston Churchill, on his 80th birthday, was presented a portrait that had been commissioned by both houses of Parliament and painted by a modernist artist, an artist that he was very skeptical of, but whom he had a wonderful conversation with. And yet when that portrait was unveiled before the houses of Parliament, Churchill could barely contain his contempt for it. At what he saw, because this modern artist had painted what he thought was real. Churchill's declining age, his physical appearance, his trying to hold on to power when he could see it and feel it slipping through his fingers. And Churchill saw something which he knew was real but didn't really want to see, and eventually burned the painting in his own backyard so that it was lost forever. What do we come to see at a manger? We end up seeing a baby. Of all things, a baby. A baby who is just like you and me in our very essence. Dependent, vulnerable, precious, beautiful, full of love. Is that what we long to behold? Some image of who we in fact may be in God's eyes, because we suddenly see it here in the very human image of God himself. John Walton, pastor of the First Presbyterian Church in New York City, wrote this: "Our faith all boils down to a name, really a name that Isaiah prophesied and Matthew 8 centuries later said was claimed and fulfilled in the birth of an exceptional child, a child who would be known as Emmanuel, God with us. That is the heart and the soul of Christmas, that God is with us in this life, has joined us in this mess, was born a babe, carried in a mother's womb, given life in a cow's stall, birthed in the most meager of circumstances, brought into the world a refugee, smuggled by night to a safe place across borders, taking his first breath in an occupied land, poverty-stricken and born to a couple, not married, only betrothed. How odd is this God to choose such a child. Emmanuel, God with us. Here we see, even as we imagine the face of the infant Christ child, not just a reminder of who we are, but the very proclamation of who God is. Love. Love for you and for the world. As you gaze into the manger, be reminded again and again and again and again that you are the object of eternal delight and love. There is something so valuable, so worthwhile about who you are, that God came into this world to say, you are mine, and I will be with you always, even unto the end of the age. Amen.